Hello there, it's Andy Parks from the Washington Times, and I'll be joined by Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor Stephen Dinan in just a few seconds. You know, as a listener to my podcast, you qualify to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times. All you have to do is go to washingtontimes.com/Andy. That's washingtontimes.com/ANDY. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here he is, Stephen Dinan. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Andy.
Well, let's start with the border crisis. Oh, wait a minute. Can we call it that now? Yes, border crisis changes as numbers set 20-year high. I read that story, I almost fell off my chair. We were told it wasn't a crisis. There was nothing to see here. What's going on?
Well, don't forget, Joe Biden used the word crisis all of a sudden about 3 weeks ago. So that's numbers. We were told, remember at that first press conference, Biden said, this happens every year. This is a seasonal thing. No, what we're seeing right now is not seasonal. What we're seeing right now is they are massive numbers. They are higher numbers than they were at the peak of the 2019 surge. They're literally the highest we've seen in 20 years. The main thing that was interesting about these numbers from last month, from April, is that the administration has been treating the problem that they're seeing down there as the unaccompanied children, the juveniles who've been showing up without parents. And they've said, yes, we realize we need to deal with that. The number of those actually dropped by about 1,500 or so from March to April. So there was a decrease there. And they're claiming victory over that. You and I think, actually talked about this. That was never going to be the major part of this surge. I actually thought that the families would be the biggest part of the surge. It turns out the number of family migrants, family units also dipped slightly. It really is a single adult surge. There are a whole lot of single adult individuals who believe that the border is now open and that they can get through. And those are not usually these really hard case refugees or people fleeing violence. And those are generally your single adult migrants are economic migrants. They're coming because, hey, I can get a job there. The Americans are on unemployment benefits. They're not showing up. And we hear all these jobs. We can go get jobs. It very much, the nature of the crisis that we saw in April suggests that this is not a temporary sort of thing. This really is a response to the Biden administration's changes in policy. The Border Patrol says that. The security experts say that. The administration has resisted saying that, but the numbers really are telling us more and more, telling us that story.
All right. Now, these are the people that we know of. What's the real number? Is there any indication as to how many people are coming in that aren't being caught on the way in?
Yeah, so I don't have those numbers for April, but I did report earlier on those numbers for February and March, and on the ratios that we're talking about. And they're called gotaways. The Border Patrol calls them gotaways, and those are the people that they know that came across that they didn't catch. And it's sort of interesting, right? They'll through sensors and tracking footprints and things like that. So some very modern technology and some very old-fashioned, thousands of years old tactics. They have a sense for how many people actually cross the border, and of course they know how many people they apprehended. And there's actually a different category of the turnbacks. Those are the people that they believe came across and then went back into Mexico. And so they can do the math, and the remainder out of the arrests and the turnbacks is the gotaways. And those numbers absolutely have been soaring. We don't, they're estimates. We don't really know exactly how many they are because there are some people they never actually detected making the crossing. But we're talking perhaps 30, 40,000. There are estimates as high as 100,000, though I think that's probably a little high for a monthly total. But 50,000 is perhaps a pretty good guess for how many people came through that we never even knew, we never even encountered them. So back to the numbers, the 178,000 that were encountered at the border, about 105,000 or so were expelled back to Mexico. And some of those are multiples, right? Some of those are people who came 2, 3, 4, 5 times and were expelled back. And they show up, each of them shows up once. But that also means that there are more than 60, perhaps 70,000 people that weren't expelled. 16,000 of those, 17,000 of those were the unaccompanied juveniles. Some of them were family units, but we're talking tens of thousands of single adults who we also weren't able to expel and immediately return back across Mexico, which is something this administration had said they were able to do. the numbers say no, they're not even doing that to the extent that the Trump administration was able to do. So it really is a challenge or a crisis on all of those fronts. And as of now, they do not have an answer for it, which those increasing numbers show.
Wife suspected of helping illegal get DHS immigration enforcement job. This has got to be quite the embarrassment.
Yeah, you would think so. The agency isn't really talking and won't say anything about this. The husband in this couple arrived in 2000 and made a bogus asylum claim, was granted that asylum case. He shouldn't have been. He never should have gotten asylum in the first place, but got it, was granted asylum, and then about a decade later applied for citizenship, still under a false identity. He claimed he was from Sierra Leone. He was actually from Nigeria. And so he claimed the asylum case was based on, hey, Sierra Leone, I'm fleeing the violence in Sierra Leone. Nope, he was actually from a rather wealthy family in a village. He was the son of sort of the leader of a village in Nigeria. And so he had this false identity he got asylum under, and then continued to use a false identity to claim citizenship, to ask for citizenship, and then changed his name at that point back to closer to his original name. He then, 3 years after applying for citizenship, then applied for a job at Homeland Security as an immigration officer and was hired under that false identity with this background of having lied on his naturalization application to the same agency and having lied about asylum to the INS, basically the precursor of Homeland Security. Complicating all of this is the fact that his wife is actually a fraud officer or anti-fraud officer at that same agency. She works in the Fraud Detection and National Security Office, FDNS, of USCIS. And she was complicit. She was aware of this. The investigators have text messages and exchanges back and forth between them where she's saying, yeah, you know, my parents think you're a fraud. They think you're a big liar because of your history. And he's like, they never liked me anyway. It's really, really troubling stuff. And the agency won't say whether she still works for them.
That's amazing, because you would think you would summarily be dismissed, you know.
Well, at least put on a job, you know. I once was talking with a reporter from a French news organization who was talking about how the French handle, you know, firing people is very difficult there. They gave an employee that they didn't really want around. They set him in front of a computer screen that wasn't plugged in and had no keyboard, and just set him in front of that computer screen and said, stay here 8 hours a day. That's your job.
Wow.
And it became so untenable. You know, the government has ways of handling people. Even if you can't fire them, you do not want somebody who has that history, if this is true, who has that history working and deciding fraud cases, obviously. There's another aspect to this, is that, and several of the people I've talked with raised this, you know, every single application that either of them reviewed is now suspect. You have an alleged, and we'll see, you know, when the case is finished, whether it will be a convicted fraudster who was deciding immigration cases, and you have someone who was allegedly complicit in that fraud as a fraud officer. Every single application they've touched is potentially tainted, and in both ways, right? There's possible that they rejected some applications that should have been approved. And in those cases, you want, you know, there may be a lawsuit. Somebody who got denied might be able to sue. But you also just as much have the other situation where they may have approved people. You know, the asylum officer, the asylum fraudster may have approved other asylum cases or other immigration citizenship cases because he was like, hey, I got through. Sure, you come on in, when they shouldn't have. So a whole lot of questions that the agency is going to have to answer at some point.
Yeah. All right. One more thing before I let you run. We Build the Wall co-founder indicted on tax evasion. This, to be clear, is not a government-sponsored effort, right?
That is correct. This was the group of guys. Now, Steve Bannon was part of this effort, you know, Donald Trump's political consultant. And there were a number of Trump supporters, very vehement Trump supporters, who were doing this, but it was a private effort. And of course, that's actually part of what's alleged in the various cases, is that it was supposed to be you know, charity, essentially, using the money, the donated money, for these operations to build a private border wall in locations along the border. And instead, the government alleges that the money was siphoned into personal accounts for personal use. Some of the money was. Now the government says not only was the money siphoned to those accounts, but Brian Kolfage, one of the co-founders of this, a wounded veteran, a very prominent Trump supporter, didn't report that income on his taxes. And so it's one of those wonderful IRS things where, the IRS doesn't care how you get the money as long as you report it. And, even if it's illegally gotten, you still need to be reporting it on your IRS forms, or else they'll ding you on that side too. And so that's what's going on here is the new IRS fraud charges.
Yeah. To be clear, though, some of the wall was built, right?
It was. There was a section in New Mexico and a section in Texas. There are a whole lot of questions about that wall and allegations that it is falling down already. And, the government was never, in fact, Trump himself was never particularly thrilled with that effort for a bunch of different reasons. Just the actual construction itself was not to the same standards of the federal wall. In fact, it came in, the federal wall, about $25 million per mile, though the private wall, maybe $1 million or so. And just so a completely different set of construction that the Border Patrol wasn't very happy about, because if they do take that over, they're going to have to come in and basically rebuild it later, they say.
Mm-hmm. All right. Very good. Anything you're working on you can tell us about, or is it top secret?
So, no, well, there is some top secret stuff that I'll be interested to talk with you about. Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas was doing some testimony this week and had an interesting thing where he mentioned that the Homeland Security is working on basically a school education unit for K through 12th graders on how to suss out disinformation. And that's a really interesting thing. And I'm going to be tracking down exactly what they have in mind there.
Yeah.
Just as an aside, it's sort of interesting that Alejandro Mayorkas, the guy who stood at the White House lectern and said, we're testing everybody for COVID, when that was actually not true, or disinformation, I might say, is now going to be in charge of a unit for elementary and high school kids on disinformation. And there's a bit of an irony there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Folks, you can read all of Stephen Dinan's stories at WashingtonTimes.com. Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it. We'll do it again.
My pleasure, Andy.
Stephen Dinan, Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor. Thanks for joining me today, and remember to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times. Go to WashingtonTimes.com/Andy. You'll get 24/7 digital access to the Washington Times at 50% off. Again, go to WashingtonTimes.com/ANDY. I'm Andy Parks. Have a great day.